Well, welcome everyone to our Tech Internship and Careers for Good webinar that we are hosting today with All Tech is Human and Techo. My name is Anmei Chung, and I am Director of Teaching and Learning Tech Initiative at New America, and I will be moderating this panel today. I'm going to briefly introduce our guest speaker and panelists, and then move into Q&A with our guest speaker and then with our panelists too as well. And we will end with some open QA from you all that you can post into the Slido, and we will respond to as many questions as possible. And then we will also put together a list of resources that I know people are going to mention during this webinar out after the webinar too as well. So with that, let me do a quick introduction of our guest speakers. We have Chike Ogu, who is his list of expertise is so long that I'm not even going to get started. So he's basically worked from in the public and the private sector. He's even started his own nonprofit organization. He is a wealth of information, as well as has so many good things to share about, being an entrepreneur, as well as being a civil servant too as well. So we're looking forward to having that conversation with Chike. In addition, we also have, let's see, next slide, please. After this, we're going to have a panel. We'll have Elsa. Go back one slide, please. There, thank you. Elsa from Schmidt Futures. She's going to talk to us a bit about Techo and what it does. And we also have Sarah W. From All Tech is Human, who has really been supporting a lot of the folks who are looking for careers in this sector and is well versed in this. And we have Shivam, who is one of the co-founders of Build for Good. Sarah Suchman is actually Sarah S, because we have two Sarahs, was one of our first Build for Good interns, and we'll talk about her experience. And Milo, who is a current Build for Good intern too as well, who will answer some questions. So with that, we will take the slides down and start with a conversation with Chike. So I encourage you all to get your questions ready for folks. But the first thing I want to ask Chike is that, I look at you and I think you must be like 80 because you've done so much in your life. So if you could tell us a little bit about like how and why you got into tech and how you got started, and talk a little bit about like all the different sectors you work in. But we can first start with like how and why you got into tech.
Sure. First of all, thank you to the organizers for putting this together. This is not easy, so I really want to thank folks, and as well as for folks who are here today. I think it's just an important conversation. I think for me, and I am probably an unusual tech person, if you can even call me that, and that I am not technical. I was a political science major. I have a few graduate degrees. None of them are in technology. And in some ways, I came to technology in a roundabout way, partially because I had deep knowledge and experience with a particular set of problems. So I started my career after undergrad, actually in the education space. I was an official in the New York City public school system. I was a teacher in New York City. I was a teacher abroad in Southeast Asia, and really spent graduate school studying how do we ideally fix and improve and update and modernize the education system to really hit so many students and workers and learners across the country who are not getting what they want to out of education. That was a problem in which I deeply care. When I came out of graduate school, I ended up, because I thought I didn't want to spend time in the private sector, I ended up going to a technology company. I went to a company at that time called the Advisory Board that was in healthcare and higher education. It's been kind of bought and sold and repackaged a number of times since then, since the decade that I was there. But I was a corporate strategy guy, and I basically was doing a lot of market analysis, looking around at things we could buy, sell. And probably about a year after I joined, I ended up pivoting into helping to launch a product, and I became effectively a product manager, a sales leader. And from there, I began to have this inkling of there are technology is a tool to solve a bunch of problems that I cared about. And my gut is you could put technology in almost any problem, and it's an accelerator used the right way. also what I also learned was used the wrong way, it actually creates more problems than it solves. And so I think learning that technology is a tool and can help you get to goal fast on the things that you care about was really powerful. And then from there, I kind of took that learning to the nonprofit space, actually, where you and I first met when I was running Everyone On, focused on the expansion of broadband access. We created a number of digital tools to make people who are um, underserved be aware of affordable internet options, because we believe back in 2015 the internet was a gateway to opportunity, and the pandemic, I think, taught that to all of us very painfully. Then from there, I actually went to the consulting space. I worked with a number of technology companies around the world around organizational change and things like that. And then fast forward a little bit, I ended up as the chief innovation officer at the U.S. Department of Labor, effectively the top kind of SME on technology, sorry, subject matter expert and advisor on emerging technologies from AI to cyber to quantum to XR to the secretary, and then also trying to figure out how you apply those to help people interact with my department better. So how do you make the unemployment insurance application process far less painful? How do you make it so the data that we have in all these disparate places actually can come together and help us create insights to better help people? So I would say I came to technology because I had knowledge and experience and care about a particular problem. And by happenstance, I began to see that, oh, technology applied a certain way can actually be helpful. Um, and to be honest, I think the thing that probably helped me along the way was less having the answers, uh, but more so being able to ask the right questions of technologists so that I could hopefully get the right answers. And then also realizing technologist and technology by itself doesn't get you the whole way. You still need strategy. You still need marketing. You still need distribution, all these things that make things run. And you also need, and I've learned this from some of the most gifted technologists, is you have to design around your customer. This is human-centered design. This is lean. This is agile. All these methodologies that came through the technology space, but that actually are really powerful when applied outside of technology, whatever the problem might be. So I think I came to it because I cared about a problem, saw its examples, and then saw some of these associated methodologies that are powerful within the tech space, but also outside. So that's how I've ended up as a technology person. Definitely didn't plan on it, but glad I'm here.
And when you think about the different roles that you've played, what characteristics do you think that you have that made you unique for these different positions? Like what was it about you with no tech background that people said, you know what, we want him on our team. He may not know tech, but he understands like X, Y, and Z. Like, what was it about you in particular? What particular skill set did you have?
That's a great question. You'd have to ask the presidential personnel office totally this question, but I think um, on my best days, let me say it like that. I think the things um, that made me useful. I think one, because I didn't get tech, I had to at times say, no, just tell me how this works. I have to make people talk very slowly. Say, tell me how this thing works. And I would always say hypotheticals. If I wanted to do this, could I? Oh no, tell me why. What version, how much of that could I do? And so I always kind of push the bounds of the technology in some ways because of my ignorance, because of the way that particular things work. And I had no shame about asking those questions. So one, I made people stop and explain things. That was number one. I think number two, I was at the Department of Labor, and that was a space I knew well. I knew workforce development particularly. And I actually had done work around service design and human-centered design previously. So I was able to push at times and say, all right, this technology, I mean, one thing I see about technologists at times um, is I know a lot of technologists who really love technology. And so what they'll do is they'll build technology for what I call the power user, the person who wants all the features, all the stuff. And then you get it, and the thing has a million buttons, but where are the 5 buttons that this person actually wants? And so I was able at times to say, you know what, all those features are great. They don't need that. I just need those 5 things, and they need to be super streamlined, super easy. And so I think I had a knowledge of the problem and of the customer. And then I think thirdly, um, on my best days, um, I would just be quiet and listen, whether it be to a customer, whether it be to people who were in the room. One thing I said the day that I left was my best days at the Department of Labor were not implementing any of my own ideas. In fact, those are some of my toughest days. The days that were really good was when someone said something, whether it be around an implementation, whether it be a civil servant who had an idea or an insight, and then realize that was important, and then try and clear things bureaucratically out of their way so that they could be successful. So I think I would say those things. In some ways, me not being a technologist was really helpful, and it also reinforced that it's an ecosystem. Again, like, if you go to any company like Amazon's not just programmers. It's not. The whole company would fall down if that was it. There are all these other things that make technology successful and useful. And if I would say anything to the folks who are going to be watching this, it is that no matter who you are. Again, I'm a political science major who like I literally didn't write code till like probably 2 or 3 years ago, um, but was able to be useful and add value to a technological process, partially because there was a problem that I knew and that I cared about, and I think on my best days, humble enough to realize what I didn't know.
Great. So what do you think is, can you explain, like, for you, what the difference is between like the tech industry and the tech for good space?
That's a good question. I think there are a lot of similarities. I would say the biggest difference is, how do you measure success? In the tech industry, it is an industry. Therefore, your success is profit, net income, revenue. In the public space, it is much harder. I'll give you an example. When I went into government, the big problem that we had to deal with as a department was unemployment insurance. And unemployment insurance, just to give a sense, during the pandemic, we dramatically expanded unemployment insurance benefits, rightfully so, because so many people were in an economically bad place. Just to put it in perspective, we give an $850 billion, almost $1 trillion, to a third of the American workforce in 12 months. In many ways, the program performed really admirably. In other ways, it ran into a lot of issues. In a lot of states, the huge increase in demand crashed websites, crashed entire systems. People waited weeks, months, years to get money that they were owed. You had as well, from a customer experience point of view, depending on who you were, you didn't have the same experience. We saw very blatantly in our data, if you were in a union, if you were older, and frankly, if you were white, you were more likely to get benefits than if you weren't, which, as a public entity, we that's an outcome that we shouldn't accept, and none of us should really accept. Thirdly, we had integrity issues. Because of changes we had to make in the program, it allowed, frankly, some nefarious actors to abscond with dollars that weren't theirs. So we had to figure out, how do you fix all that at scale? And so for some people, the outcome was get people their checks as quickly as possible. That's success. Well, I could do that by not asking them anything and just throwing money out the window. I could do that. That could be success. But there's some other people who said, no, 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 no. Success is no dollar goes to anyone it shouldn't go to. Well, easy. There's a way to do that. Just don't give anyone money. So negotiating what success is, I think, the biggest issue, and defining that at the front end is so important. It's always important, but I would argue not doing that in the public sector is fatal. I think all of us who work on technology projects, you come up with your requirements documents and things like that. But in the public sector, it is fatal if you don't do that. I think secondly, there are far more stakeholders. When I came in, I was sworn in. Joe Biden was sworn in at 12 o'clock. I was sworn in at 2:30 about 3 years ago. I was told to have my computer on by 3, and all of a sudden I had meetings. I hadn't even set foot in the building. I had meetings with the White House, Congress, members of my 15,000 person agency, a bunch of outside groups I had never met before. Because and again, in some ways that is different. If you're in a company, your stakeholders, yes, you have stakeholders, but in the end, it's your internal colleagues, it's your customers, it's potentially your board and your governance, and maybe if you're publicly traded, the street, or if you're private, your investors. Much smaller universe, and they all have opinions and they all have power over you. And so figuring out how you manage all that to get to the end result, which is how do I deliver for the customer, which from my view are the Americans who vote for us, pay for us, and who we are responsible for serving. That was far more challenging than when I was in the private sector.
So those numbers give us one perspective. You're basically working for far many more people in the
Oh yeah, no, there are companies who operate at that scale. But the other thing I'll say, and this is the last thing, is the locus of perceived responsibility is different. And here's what I mean by that. If there's a hurricane somewhere, no one calls Amazon and says, "What are you going to do?" If there's a snowstorm, no one calls Google and says, "What are you going to do?" But for each of those things, literally the next day, I had a meeting to say, what are we going to do about the hurricane that just happened in Puerto Rico? Because the Department of Labor gives out emergency unemployment insurance benefits. So we have to move. And we realized very quickly, oh, shoot, the website's not going to work because all the internet's been knocked out across the entire island. So we have to figure out another option. And so that's another thing that is very important. There were meetings at times where I was like, wow, where we are. I mean, if we're not responsible, then who is? And so I think that is, for me, that was really exciting. On some days it was a bit intimidating, but that is another huge difference between those two spaces.
So what keeps you motivated in your career path?
I think for me, it's that base set of problems. I mean, for those of you who know me, and Anme knows this, you know, my family's a very classic immigrant story to this country. My family is from a village in Nigeria that most Nigerians themselves will never go to and never see. None of my grandparents went past middle school. My parents had Peace Corps volunteers in their classrooms. The streets they were born on were unpaved then; they're unpaved now. And they got to come to America because of American higher education, American economic opportunity, and they had me and my siblings, and I got to work for an American president. That's a amazing but very unlikely economic arc for a family in America, and I've tried to dedicate myself to replicating that for as many others as possible. That's why I care about this. It is that set of problems that keeps me motivated. And I would argue for anyone who's in this space, particularly if you're going to go into the tech for good space, your knowledge of and care about the problem is what's going to keep you going. I think about my colleagues who when I came into government, this was January of 2021. They had just started giving out vaccines the month before. We didn't even know if they really worked. I sat in this chair for 20 hours a day, but my colleagues who are working on COVID rollout, testing, who are working on giving out the paycheck protection program to keep businesses open, the restaurant program that basically kept restaurants from having to lay off everybody where they could. I mean, trust me, what got them going was not ones and zeros. What got them going was like, oh, wow, there are people who are going to be helped by what I do. And that's why they stayed up so long and worked so hard. And so that's what I would say, particularly if you're doing the tech for good space, know the problem. And particularly if you can get out there and see the people and have them not be abstractions, but actually be people, that's going to keep you going. That's going to keep you motivated. And that's what's going to get your juices going to figure out, okay, I've got to figure this out, whatever this is.
So one last question for you in this section. What kind of advice do you have for someone who's just starting to explore careers in this tech for good sector?
Great question. One, going back to the problem, be good at the problem. Understand the problem that you want to solve. The problem is not a technology problem. Technology is a tool. But understand the problem and get out to what I call the front line of the problem. If you care about how do I help refugees who are coming from, pick your country, Ukraine, Afghanistan, go to a processing center. Go meet families who have been resettled. Like, do that and do it often, because it's easy, particularly when you're in government, to get far away from that. And someone once described it, being in government is like being in a submarine at times. You know things are happening, but you can't quite see them because of the structure of government. I think that's one. I think two, whatever you're good at, be really good at. You know, I was never going to be the best coder in the building. Absolutely not. I barely know enough to be dangerous. There were certain things I was good at. I'm a business strategy guy. I always have been. You want to get me in front of a whiteboard, I'm pretty good. I was actually a sales guy. I was also generally pretty good at explaining things to a lay audience. I got good at that. I knew, again, my set of issues and problems from a substance perspective. Be good at that. Be 2 or 3 standard deviations better at that than normal people. And then everything else, know who is so that they can be on your team, which is that last part. Having the humility and the self-knowledge to know, shoot, who else needs to be on the team, because you're never going to do it by yourself. And in fact, the people who go in the public sector and try and do that go down in not even a blaze of glory, a blaze of infamy, because not only do you fail yourself, but you actually tank a project, which could have helped a lot of people. So being able to build that team around you of people who are also 2 or 3 standard deviations better at something than others, that's how you get to success.
Well, thank you, Chike. That is a great set of advice and motivating stories for everybody, not just on this panel, but on the call too as well. And so I want to turn to Elsa. And ask Elsa to tell us a little bit about what Techo is and how we get more people into this tech for good sector.
Yeah, for sure. So Techo, kind of a confusing name, but it's spelled Tkalo, and you can find it on tekalo.org. So it's basically a platform that matches tech workers to social impact organizations. So we launched this past June, so it's still pretty new. I've been leading this program for about 2 years, and I've been doing a lot of research in kind of the problem space around getting more tech talent into the social impact space. So yeah, the reason why we started this whole platform was basically by talking to a lot of people who were looking for these types of roles. It was really hard to find them. They didn't know where to look. Like, for example, I myself studied computer science at Georgia Tech. When I was trying to find my first job, like it was mostly the tech industry and big tech that were being surfaced to me on anything from career fairs, newsletters, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff. And I didn't know where to go to find those social impact roles. So since then, there have been a few job boards that were created. For example, All Tech is Human has a great job board, Tech Jobs for Good, which kind of do a great job about like kind of consolidating these roles. But you still have the problem of you need to apply to a bunch of jobs separately. So you fill out hundreds of applications and maybe you hear back from like a couple of them, which can be a frustrating experience. So that's how we came up with Techo, which is basically a common application for the social impact opportunities. So you go on the website, you fill out one application where you tell us about your skill set, experience, and what type of roles you're interested in. And then you get assigned to a talent connector who will then review that application and try to find the right matches for you. So since June, we've had 140 opportunities submitted to us from a bunch of different organizations in the space looking for these talents. And we've had over 4,000 candidates who have applied for these roles, which is really exciting to see all the interest out there. So yeah, basically, once you fill out an application, the talent connector has a match for you. They'll reach out, and if you're interested in the role, they'll kind of do a recruiter screen with you. And then, assuming there is a fit between you and the organization, then we'll introduce you directly. So that way, you kind of get the human connection aspect of it as well.
Is there a fee for this service?
Great question. No, it is a free service for both candidates and organizations. And yeah, we actually launched this in partnership with 3 other organizations, All Tech is Human, who you'll hear from Sarah here as well, US Digital Response, they focus on local and state government opportunities, and Fast Forward, which is a tech nonprofit accelerator.
Great. And what do you think nonprofits are looking for? You clearly have spoken with them and gotten a lot of engagement. What do you think, if you could categorize them, what are the kinds of things they're looking for in a potential employee?
Yeah, for sure. So nonprofits are in great need of tech talent. I would say now more than ever. So now it's a great time to get into the space. There are by working at a nonprofit, it's you get a great opportunity of kind of working on a cause that you really care about, having more ownership of a project while building your skill set, which is really fun. And yeah, I would say some things nonprofits are looking for are one, because their teams tend to be a lot smaller, they're looking for people who want to have that ownership of a project. They want more responsibility. They want to be able to define things, decide on the technical architecture, while maybe even making some product decisions themselves. So they're looking for people with experience in that. For example, someone that has worked at a startup before could be a good fit because of that. They're looking for people who are passionate in the cause area that the nonprofit is working on. Particularly, a lot of them are looking for people with relevant lived experiences, who kind of have that knowledge and they know what the problem space is. So they actually know how to go about addressing it, and they have access to the users that they're trying to build a product for. The third thing is most nonprofits are not working on cutting edge technology by no means. They're mostly focused on kind of utilizing existing technologies and tools that are out there and figuring ways to connect those, maybe build some stuff on top of that. So it's mostly focused on finding the right solution for a problem versus like building some cool tech just to say that you built some cool tech. So that's one thing to flag. And then if you want to work at a nonprofit, you should understand that that's the case and kind of be interested in that. I I will say a lot of nonprofits, because they're looking for people who have a bit more experience, sometimes they have some expectations around like the years of experience that you've had working and the type of experience that you've had. So I've seen a lot of nonprofits have kind of like a 4 years of experience cutoff. So anything below that can be a bit tough since you don't get the mentorship and support that you may need. And last two things I'll call out. One, you should be able to kind of thrive both working independently, but also part of a group. So sometimes you may be, if you're a software engineer, you may be the only software engineer on the team. So you need to be able to kind of work on your own, but also be able to collaborate with all your, I guess, cross-functional partners. And the last piece is people at nonprofits usually wear multiple hats. So for example, again, as an engineer, you may be the only full stack engineer, but you also have to do DevOps and QA and like coordinate with a bunch of people, which in the tech industry, you likely won't have to do a lot of that.
And I would say, Chike, you should jump in, having been in these spaces before, to offer any advice in terms of what Elsa is sharing. Because
I think Elsa is exactly right. She said it really well. It requires ownership and flexibility. You're going to be when I ran a nonprofit, we were a team of 25. And you basically have to, in some ways, times be a whole team in and of yourself. The other thing that I would say is it requires you, I think, to be on top of any tools that can increase your productivity. Again, when I ran my nonprofit in 2015, I think about even just some of the very elementary AI power tools that exist now. We had none of those, but you have to be a master of those, because you likely will not be able to bring on additional personnel to help you. So you're gonna have to figure it out yourself among you and your small team. So I agree with everything that she said, and I also say, just to reiterate something that she said, you being close enough to the work of the organization is really important. I've seen some nonprofits where the tech person is kind of over here on the side and the program work is over there. That's a mistake. You will not build what you need to if you are not intimately involved with the problem. I say the same thing. Be out, be on site, meet the customers, be in those programming meetings just to know what's going on, because you'll just build a better product. Because in many ways, your program colleagues are your customers as well, and so you just got to be close to that front line. But I agree with everything that Elsa said. It resonates with my experience as a nonprofit CEO.
Great. Sarah W., I'm sure a lot of the folks who are listening are saying, like, how do you get your resume or application noticed? There's 4,000, Elsa said, like, how do you end up being one of the 100 plus that gets noticed?
That's a great question. One I get a lot, and a lot of people struggle with that, especially, trying to figure out how to get their resume notice past like an applicant tracking system that's, these systems that are just reading your resume and not a person. Or even when a person is reading them, how do you like get noticed in this huge pile? Because sometimes these jobs will get like, you can see on LinkedIn, like a job will say, 500 people also applied, and you're like, great. Like, what do I do? So I look at a lot of resumes through Techo, and I'm just gonna kind of give some like high level advice on this, because there's so much more that can be said about resumes. This could be like a whole separate webinar. This kind of goes for anybody, not just people looking to move into the social impact space, but really anyone. And my biggest piece of advice, I think, is that you don't necessarily, or not necessarily, you definitely don't want anyone looking at your resume to have to read between the lines. You want to spell things out for them. This can be really hard to nail, and it takes some practice and a lot of iterating and different versions of your resume to get it right, especially when you're starting out and you're just kind of trying to figure out what it is exactly you want to do, and you're still trying to figure out your trajectory. But people like me who are looking at resumes all day, we're looking for keywords to see if you're a fit for a job. And so especially, and you'll see this advice a lot, like this is pretty standard, but it's important. We'll be looking for keywords that are in the job description. And if we don't see those keywords, or the system we're using doesn't see them, your resume is going to get overlooked. So like, think about, if just to use a like very basic example. Let's say we're recruiting for a software engineer, and I don't see the word software engineer anywhere in your resume. Like, you know, you're probably not going to get a second look, because we just sort of need to know on the, you know, a high level how you're a fit. And you need to spell that out for people. And that can also be really hard when you're trying to pivot and, you know, turn past experience into other experience. But, you know, when you're applying for a job, I would just look really closely at the job description and pull out keywords that job is looking for that you can fit into your resume somehow as it aligns with your experience. And I would also say you want to, you know, make sure that your resume is presenting like a relative value proposition. So, you know, this means that every job you apply to, your resume might look a little bit different. It might be customized for that job. You know, if you're sending out, you're not getting your resume ever noticed, but you're sending just the same resume out wildly to a bunch of different positions, it's not going to be tailored enough. And that kind of goes with the whole keywords advice. What else do I want to say about this? I feel like I could go could go on and on. I would say that like having a summary section in your resume is really good and hits all of these points. You know, I'm happy to answer other questions that are more specific, but I'll kind of, I think I'll leave it at that for now for the resumes. And we can move on.
What do you think is the best way to get noticed on social media, and what's the best social media to get noticed on, do you think? You mentioned LinkedIn.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
You're good. How do you get
Okay.
noticed?
Yeah, LinkedIn. LinkedIn is kind of like the place now for job stuff. I mean, I live on there. You know, it makes it easy for you to connect with other people, and to see, you know, especially when you're getting started. My advice for LinkedIn would be like, LinkedIn makes it really easy to just kind of lurk around and see what other people are doing, what they're talking about, you know, who they're connected with. And so, I mean, I know when I was getting started, I just, you know, connected with some people who I kind of knew, and grew my network, and just sort of saw and took note of what other people were doing on there. And I think, you know, that can be really helpful. And then eventually moving up to a point where you can create your own content on there. You know, there has to be something that you're good at. Everybody has something that's like their, you know, special thing. And it can be, you know, a really good idea to actually like create content around that thing. It could even just be like sharing a news article and writing a little something about it. You could also be like commenting and interacting with other people's stuff. And that, you know, just starting off small and going from there is like a good way to just build up a presence and a network, and get noticed. And that can be really helpful. I think in this day and age, especially with how competitive everything is, you know, it's like all about your network. So
GK, because you are a LinkedIn contact for me, I noticed like you're one of the people who regularly gets like hundreds of likes.
Oh, wow, you're on top of my analytics. You're better than me. I think that everything that Sarah W said is very right. I mean, I think, how will I say this? You know, when I'm older than some people who I'm sure are gonna watch this. I remember when social media like first came out, it was like, oh man, this is where I go and I bare my soul and I think out loud. It's not really that. In the end, it's a place where I think you are looking to let the world know what you're looking to do. And I think kind of thinking about kind of what you put out there, um, from whether it be just what's in your profile to the content that you put out to the things that you comment on, you're kind of putting out there a value proposition about yourself. Hey, here's the value that I think that I can bring. And you want to reinforce that continually, not just through your resume, but through your profile, through your content, through your comments. And I have been surprised that the people who have like quote unquote found me just by like I didn't mean to be found. I just there are things I care about that I post relentlessly about. And it can be, you know, in marketing, you talk about push marketing and pull marketing, which is when, you know, push being where you try to spam people, you try to get in people's faces. And then there's pull marketing, where you bring people to you and use the right way. Social media can be a method of pull marketing for yourself. And so I do encourage people to, like Sarah said, be thoughtful about what you put up and think about, if someone were to see what I just put up, does it get me closer or farther away from the role, the work, the projects that I want to be doing, that I think are part of my purpose.
Great advice. I'm going to move on to our next part, which is about internships for college students, but I want to encourage people who are listening to send your questions in, as because we will go into Q&A very shortly in terms of answering your questions. So I want to turn this over to Shivam, who is one of the co-founders of Build for Good, and ask him to just give us a brief overview of what it is.
Yeah. So Build for Good is an internship program for technical students who are passionate about working on something more driven, more mission driven, or with a social cause. So the way it works is we look at college students and look at, you know, what are they passionate about? What are their skills? What are they interested in working on from the technical side, but also from a social cause side. And we also look at nonprofits that are asking for technical support, and we basically match them. You know, this started in 2020 when the pandemic first began, because a lot of students were losing their internships and a lot of nonprofits were trying to figure out how to turn their operations virtual. And we figured, hey, why don't we just bridge that gap? These students are looking for technical experiences, and these nonprofits are looking for someone with technical skills. Why don't we just bridge that gap? And we kept it going each summer, and this is actually our fifth year, fifth cohort. And we kept it going each year because we noticed that a lot of students really liked the opportunity to work with nonprofits. It's something that I, as a computer science student myself, was looking for through college, and actually how I met Anme. And then on top of it, a lot of nonprofits really appreciated the opportunity to have that sort of technical experience, while also Build for Good kind of provided a lot of the program support that a traditional internship often has, right? So I also kind of mentioned, you know, one, that nonprofits are often stretched very thin, and you know, have a 4-year cutoff experience to work in the nonprofit space often. And so we found that when we provide that support, it can often help alleviate that sort of pain for nonprofits, but then also provide a lot of support and guidance for students. So that's Build for Good at a high level. In terms of the program structure itself, I'll briefly touch on that as well. It isn't just focused on being, you know, your standard internship where you're just working on a project. It is really focused on getting students actually thinking deeply about the work that they're working on, and on top of that, providing these students with mentorship, providing them with the structure of an internship, and on top of that, we provide students with a Slack community. We have an in-person convening in DC, weekly check-ins, and as well as speakers as well, to come in and talk about things such as human-centered design, how to think about the problem space that you're working in, and how to really question about the work that you're working on. So that's a little bit about Build for Good. Any questions on that, feel free to put that in the chat. But yeah.
Thank you, Shivam. And Sarah, you were, Sarah S., you were in our first cohort. We didn't even know it was a cohort. We just scrambled to match people who were interested with nonprofits and thought we should just do this. And you came to us as one of those potential interns. Can you tell us what you are doing now, but also what's different about the Build for Good experience than other internships that you had done?
Absolutely. So right now, what I do is I work for clean tech, clean energy, and I work in project development. So more on the business side, but sort of, you know, adjacent to the tech that we develop. In terms of how that experience measures up against others, I would say it was a lot more holistic. I think, you know, there was a much bigger picture going on, and there were more resources for sort of like, how is this how am I growing from this? How is it an experience for me rather than just for the company? I think other internships that I've done since Build for Good, it felt a lot more like, am I an asset? Like, am I worth keeping? Whereas with Build for Good, it was a lot more about like, how can we help each other? And it felt like a matchmaking internship almost. But yeah, I would say generally it felt a lot more holistic and supported.
And how did the Build for Good experience help you sort of determine what you wanted to do, when you graduated?
I think my experience was a little bit interesting because one of the internships that I was paired with was very tech heavy. It was, GIS mapping, stuff that I had learned in school. The other experience or the other partner that I worked with, it was a lot more, like project management based. And those I think are two really different trajectories that I could have done with what I majored in, which was sustainability. And it really gave me, the opportunity to see those two sides, and to kind of get my foot in the door and put a label on my trajectory, that I think helped, my resume get recognized a little bit better than somebody who maybe has like research experience or like school experience, and doesn't really know how to like brand it.
And why do you keep coming back and helping us? Because we really appreciate it.
I love it. I think it's really refreshing work. I don't work in a nonprofit, and I love my job, but it's very different. It's fun to come back, and it makes me feel good, and it's a great community.
Milo, you are have been an intern, a Build for Good intern for a while. But what's been unique about your Build for Good experience?
So first of all, hello. And I definitely resonate with Sarah's words. It felt like Build for Good kind of gave me roots to grow from. And if I had to like pick one element that stuck out to me the most is the cohort experience. It's not often that so wait, to explain this, every summer there is this cohort, and within the cohort, we're all working kind of linked up with different organizations, and we all get to meet with each other and essentially develop skills, listen to speakers, and I remember my first time at Build for Good, I was taken aback because I was like, I've never been in an environment like this where we are all kind of at the same step and all able to grow and learn together, especially when it comes to professional development and just being really honest about the place you are at and the trajectory you want to have when it comes to especially like really technical tech skills or being able to develop your own professional career and having a network of people that are all at the same place as you kind of like felt like a support system. It felt like kind of having weight taken off your back, and it really motivated me to keep coming back to Build for Good.
Right. And you are now a junior, correct, at NYU? How is it shaping, your experience with Build for Good and the things you've worked on, shaping what you're thinking about your future career?
It's definitely like flipped everything on its head. I came from the perspective that if you're studying engineering or any engineering adjacent, like design oriented field, you're going to work in tech. You're going to work in a for-profit field. And that's kind of like where you're going to come out after 4 years of of a bachelor's degree. And then I saw Build for Good, and I am grateful that I had the opportunity to join, and I saw that there was tech roles in different sectors that were actually having a lot more ownership and a lot more impact in the skills that essentially everybody else was learning in school. And it basically has opened my eyes to the possibility of working in the nonprofit field, with the background of web development, full stack development, being a UI UX designer, and being able to contribute with kind of just the principles of human-centered design.
That's great. Okay, we are going to move into Q&A. So please send your questions into that. We have a question here. I'll just actually read it because the compliment to us is, "Hi all, thank you all for the excellent advice. I was wondering if you have any recommendations for career changers in terms of what to include on a resume."
I could take this one. But I mean, I would say it's like very dependent to your background. There is a really good book called Pivot. I think the author is Jenny Blake. I would look at that book. I found it really helpful for myself. It just kind of goes through like, everything you need to know to do that, from somebody who's done that and who's also like helped other people pivot. So that's a really good resource. And then, I mean, when it comes to resumes, I would, just kind of look at what you've done so far, and, have a good picture of where you want to go and be able to highlight in your resume from the background that you want to pivot from, like relevant experience to the next thing, even if it's like something really small, or like a small project. It doesn't matter like how long you worked on something, just that you did it. And I think somebody told me that once, and I always thought that was just helpful to keep in mind. But yeah, it's going to be really, dependent on your own background and where you want to go. I don't know if anybody has anything they want to add to that.
The only thing that I might add is I think all the things that Sarah said are right on. I would, whether it's in a cover letter or something else, I think you want to articulate the why. The big question was when you're going to do something super different from what you've done, they're going to ask why. And I would say, don't let them ask, like tell them. And, someone once told me, you want your career journey to kind of read like a movie. You want all the parts of the story to kind of go together. So if the next act in the movie looks different from the last, give an explanation for why. Was it an experience? Was it a long pent up desire that you've had and you're finally acting on? But just like, don't let them just wonder like why the change. Like just like tell them, make it compelling and make it clear.
Right. Any more questions from folks who are in the audience? If not, I'm going to, ask all of our speakers and panelists to share a resource or a person that they like to read or follow for inspiration. Like, what inspires you all to keep going in the work that you do every day? Is there a person or a book or a resource?
I'll name one. Good friend, Jen, who I'm sure that many people know here, Jen Polka, who helped found Code for America. Her new book, and also just follow her on Twitter or LinkedIn. But she's kind of one of the founders of the civic tech movement in kind of the modern sense, who helps on the U.S. Digital Service and so on and so forth. But I think she's really thoughtful about how you take not just the technology, but the processes from government and overlay them on top of these big social problems, because it requires some reverse engineering. So Jen Polka, PAHLKA, and she's great to follow and an amazing colleague.
Well, while others are thinking, I'm going to ask another question so you have a little chance to think about that. Here's another question. A lot of internships, fellowships are geared towards people who are college students or recent grads. Are there resources specifically for career changers?
I can speak to that a little bit, but not, I don't know. It's not like a specific resource. It's just like a piece of advice. Like we, sometimes we'll see, I don't know, like if you have the resources or the time to like take on a small volunteer opportunity in the sense that you just like keep your job and then you're like helping out a friend with something that can be like a kind of an internship ish. It just like gives you something else to talk about that's relevant to the career transition you want to make. And that can be, kind of like a DIY internship. I don't know if anybody else has any other thoughts on that kind of thing, but that's just something that I've seen people do with success if they have the time and resources.
I think there are actually a lot of fellowships for mid-career folks. I mean, in fact, that's how Chiki and I met through the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program. There are great mid-career opportunities, and I don't necessarily know that either one of us were going into it. At least I wasn't as a career changer, but it did change the way I thought about my career. So, but there are fellowships that are specifically targeted at people at mid-career. So I would look for things like that too as well.
Just say that there's a great site run by a good friend, Vicki Johnson, called ProFellow.com. It's probably the best database I've seen of those types of fellowship opportunities, time limited, where we can kind of look up and see things that kind of fit your particular kind of vantage point, what you're looking to go, where you're looking to go, what you're looking to do. The only other thing that I might say, on top of the find a way to kind of work for free for a little bit, is FaceTime matters a lot. So there are some, there's the South Bys of the world, the South by Southwest of the world, the CES of the world, but there are the Code for America conferences. I would argue the number one civic technology conference to go to. But like, be where people are, because you'll be surprised sometimes. Even if you're not a technologist, you will be surprised. Hey, maybe someone does need a strategist, someone or I know, for example, when I was working in government and I would work with the US Digital Service, they had a number of procurement experts who were just good at contracting to help agencies figure out how to get the right contractor. So don't assume that just because you're not a technologist in the classic sense that you don't have value. And at times you can make that value clear by being in someone's face who articulates a need.
Here's another question. What advice might you have for someone who's early in their career, who works for a for-profit, but wants to move towards tech for social good over time?
Happy to take that because I just did that 2 years ago. Yeah, I was working at Apple for a couple of years and was looking to pivot into the social impact space because I did not want to work in big tech anymore. I feel like as a product manager, especially like Chike mentioned earlier, kind of making all your decisions based off of profit versus like what's the right thing to build for your users can be very tricky. So resources wise, I would say like definitely utilize things like Techo and like the All Tech is Human Slack channel. They also do amazing events in New York City if you're ever around here, and kind of like figuring out ways to join that community and kind of like talk to people who are in the social impact space, whether that's nonprofits or like governments or whatever else that may be. So try to like learn from them, ask about their own journey, and then other things you can do is there are a couple of cool like podcasts and newsletters that we can maybe include in the resources that we share afterwards that kind of like talk about specific cause areas. Like there's tons of things happening in the climate space, for example. Also, civic tech is pretty very popular these days. So definitely lots of great content there. And yeah, and the last thing is kind of like it's been mentioned already, but things like volunteering, contributing to open source projects, doing some personal projects in a cause area that you really care about, and kind of like trying to learn about it and kind of showcase using your skills to kind of build out something that you can then showcase in your resume and your application for these roles. So yeah.
There's another question that I'm pretty sure a lot of people are faced with right now. I'm not sure you all have an answer for this, but what's some advice for recent grads who are having a tough time finding a software developer job in any industry and aren't getting callbacks? Any advice?
So this is my advice, and someone I was always the opposite of this. This might be a time to brush up on another skill, which is so again, if you're someone who majored in computer science, or you will always have that. But if you also can, hey, I'm going to work on, I spent time as a management consultant. We had a ton of engineers and former computer scientists who came on and worked on strategy or working on non-technological things. And what's powerful about that is at some point they will be hiring again. Don't worry. And if you can come there, not just with your base technological skills, and hopefully you keep fresh through some of the things that we've talked about. And now you also say, hey, I'm also good at strategy. I learned digital marketing. You can go take a digital marketing course from Google for $150 over 6 months and leave with that stuff. It might be a time to figure out how do I learn a new skill, get practice there, so that later I can kind of combine those into something really powerful. That might be an unorthodox strategy, but it's one that I would think about.
Yeah, I would agree to that as well. I think the other thing to consider is there are probably a lot of people in a similar situation, all looking for a software engineering job. And so whatever way that you can find your own sort of leg up or your leverage or what makes you unique will be incredibly powerful. And whether that's finding a new skill, going deep into the intersectionality between different spaces. So between like tech and climate, for example, or tech and education, wherever you can kind of find your niche is an opportunity for you to define yourself in a really unique way. And then like we said already, also just staying close to the work and trying to get yourself involved wherever you can. I mean, elections are coming up and they're going to need a lot of tech work, right? And then on top of that, nonprofits are always looking for tech work as well, right? So staying involved in whatever way you can, even if that means getting really, really creative and just looking at the local pizza shop near you and realizing that they need a new website. Hey, if you can make a few extra bucks out of it, why not? And brush up on your skills, show something for your portfolio. It's something creative, it's something unique, and something to talk about. So why not?
Hey, we have 1 minute left, and I will have one more question, then I'm going to end with just sharing some of the websites. Do you have any advice for someone coming out of school with no full-time experience?
I can take this. I used to teach, and with my students who are all, I don't know, freshmen and later, at UT Austin, I would encourage them, especially if they hadn't had like an internship or something, to like propose to me a final project where they were like building or making something, because that can just give them something to put on a resume, even if it's not like necessarily legible, like paid experience. Like you can really make your own projects, and that can be like really useful. I talk to people coming out of undergrad all the time who've just like they're trying to get a software engineering role, and they've basically just like built their own little portfolio with like things that they've made themselves that aren't necessarily a like a paid role. So there's like a lot of things you can do like that, that are really legible to people who are hiring, and that would be my advice. Just like get creative.
Well, we are at time. I want to, first of all, give a couple of websites. Elsa, what is the website for Techo?
It is techolo.org.
Great. And Build for Good is Shivam?
Build the number 4 good.tech. So build for good.tech.
And you can get on both of those websites and find out how to apply for an internship and get matched with a nonprofit, or you can get on Techo and look for that matching opportunity. So thank you all. Once again, thank you, thank you. Great, great advice, and appreciate all the time that you spent on this. And this will be recorded and up and available for folks on our events page very shortly, within 48 hours. So thank you all very much. And thanks for everyone who tuned in to listen and for your great questions.